For months, energy had been one of Russia's strongest pressure points. The pipelines, the tankers, the refineries scattered across vast territory, all feeding the same lifeline that kept the war machine funded and the domestic economy moving, even under sanctions. That system had been hit before, sabotaged, bombed, disrupted. But what unfolded over a single 24-hour window wasn't just another strike. It was a coordinated stress test on the idea that Russia's oil export network was too big, too spread out, too protected to seriously destabilize. It started before most people were watching. Not with explosions, not with social media clips, not even with official statements. It started with anomalies. Tracking services that monitor tanker movements began noticing unusual holds. Vessels that should have loaded were lingering. Ports that usually clear shipments at predictable intervals went quiet. Pipeline flow reports started showing dips that didn't match routine maintenance or weather delays. To most observers, it looked like a normal hiccup in a chaotic system. It wasn't. The first confirmed disruption didn't happen at a coastline. It happened inland, hours earlier. A facility that handled crude processing for export flow, not the type usually shown in dramatic footage, suddenly went offline. Not completely destroyed, just malfunctioning enough to halt routing temporarily. Engineers on site reported system irregularities. Control panels rebooting, pressure readings fluctuating, nothing cinematic. Just enough to force a shutdown for safety reasons. Within minutes, backup systems tried to compensate. That's when the second disruption hit. Hundreds of kilometers away, near a different processing node, nighttime monitoring cameras caught what looked like small flashes in the distance. Not a missile. Too small. Too precise. More like something briefly touching the infrastructure, not obliterating it. Power systems at the location experienced voltage drops. Backup generators activated, but synchronization failed. And that delay, only minutes long, was all it took to affect the flow chain. Oil doesn't move like trucks. You don't just detour. It moves as part of a living mechanical web. And if you stress the web at 3 or 4 critical points simultaneously, everything above and below that stress starts behaving unpredictably. The drones used weren't enormous military spectacle machines. They weren't designed for media. They were practical, long-range, low-signature. Some carried payloads. Some didn't need to. A few only served to confuse air defenses, triggering alerts in one direction while the real targets were approached from another. Russian air defense systems, tuned for aircraft and missiles, weren't built with hundreds of small, slow-moving targets in mind. When multiple contacts appear on radar at low altitude and varying speeds, prioritization becomes a problem. Shoot at everything, and you reveal positions and waste expensive interceptors. Ignore too much, and you risk letting something through. That night, they had to guess. And guessing is where things went sideways. Several drones were intercepted. That wasn't the failure. That was expected. The problem was what the remaining few touched. Not hardened military airfields. Not symbolic government buildings. Infrastructure that sits in a strange gray zone. Civilian on paper. Strategic in reality. A pumping station that feeds a pipeline to a major export port experienced a localized fire after impact. Quickly extinguished. Damage contained. But operations had to stop while inspections took place. Another drone caused minimal physical damage but triggered safety shutdowns due to automated hazard detection. A third reportedly interfered with sensor arrays that monitor pressure along a long-distance transport line. And here's the part most people miss. You don't need to destroy oil infrastructure to cripple exports. You just need to make operators afraid to run it at full capacity. Within hours, Russian energy authorities and private operators started issuing internal restrictions. Reduce throughput, increase inspection intervals, delay departure schedules, safety over speed. All reasonable decisions. All devastating for a system built around volume and consistency. At the ports, tankers began stacking up. Shipping companies hate uncertainty more than delay, because delay can be priced in. Uncertainty can't. Insurers monitoring the region started adjusting risk profiles as reports filtered out. Premiums quietly increased for routes connected to affected terminals. Some vessels were instructed to hold offshore until new clearances were approved. Others diverted toward alternate ports that weren't designed for the sudden increase. That created a bottleneck. By mid-morning, analysts tracking export flows began seeing the real impact. Russian oil loading rates fell noticeably. Not halved, not obliterated. just slowed in a way that looked small on paper and massive in effect. Why? Because oil markets run on tight timing. A few delayed tankers today ripple into pricing weeks later. And inside Russia, it wasn't just about money. It was about reliability. A defensive system isn't just judged by whether it can shoot down drones. It's judged by whether it can reassure the people using the system. And that reassurance cracked. Internal reports, according to open-source monitoring and leaked communications, showed management scrambling, not because everything was destroyed, but because no one knew where the next pressure point would occur. It could be another pumping station, a port substation, a storage facility. No warning, no predictable pattern, which forces a shift from confidence to caution. And caution slows everything. In the afternoon, state media acknowledged attempted attacks on energy infrastructure. The language was controlled, minimized, but operators don't speak for the public. They speak for themselves. And behind the scenes, inspection teams were being moved faster than usual. Repair crews were on standby. Redundant routing was activated, even for systems that rarely needed it. This wasn't damage control. It was stress control. Economically, the implications were immediate in subtle ways. Russia's crude pricing, already under pressure from international caps and rerouted buyers, faced temporary uncertainty. Buyers in Asia and other regions that had adapted to Russian exports started factoring in delays. They demand discounts when delivery timelines look shaky. They demand guarantees. They demand alternatives, all of which reduce leverage. And then came the psychological factor. The videos, short, grainy, poorly lit clips began circulating on social platforms. They didn't show massive fireballs. They didn't show destruction porn. They showed security guards looking up, alarm lights, sudden flashes, long shots of distant smoke columns, control room screens with error codes blinking. To a civilian audience, it looked minor. To anyone familiar with infrastructure operations, it looked like a nightmare. A system being poked, not smashed. Touched, not crushed. Because when something is smashed, you rebuild. When it's unpredictably poked, you hesitate. By evening, the extent of the 24-hour impact had started to settle in. Export volumes hadn't collapsed entirely, but they had been cut enough to be noticed on global flow trackers. Russian officials pushed reassurance statements. Energy ministries emphasized resilience. But resilience wasn't the point. Vulnerability had already been demonstrated. This wasn't about destroying Russia's oil industry in one day. That was never the goal. It was about sending a message through logistics instead of rhetoric. That message being simple: no system is too big to disturb. And Ukraine's use of drones in this scenario wasn't revolutionary because of raw technology. Drones have been used in countless conflicts. What made it different was how they were used strategically, not to capture land, not to win headlines, but to disrupt confidence in an economic artery. Military analysts later described it as pressure warfare, not warfare of annihilation, warfare of destabilization, a form of combat where you don't aim to break the opponent's arm. You aim to make them afraid to move it. By the end of the 24 hours, Russian energy operations were technically functional again in many areas. Flows were gradually resuming, ports reopening, systems recalibrating. But the day had done its job. Because after that, every operator watching pressure gauges, every commander monitoring air defense alerts, every logistics manager overseeing export schedules knew something uncomfortable. The threat wasn't going away.